Hello everyone, welcome to week 4. We're actually beginning to get into the different regions of the world, and this week we're going to talk about the United States and Canada. So you'll notice on the news page of the Carmen site, we have a word cloud that has your impressions of what comes to mind when you think of the US and Canada. Please take a second to take a look at that and keep that in mind. An important thing to keep in mind for this week is that on Wednesday, the first assessment is due. The project, the Place Analysis Project. There's a Dropbox for that on Carmen, and there's a rubric up there as well, so you understand what your grade is going to be based around. If you have questions as you get closer to that, feel free to contact me about that, and I'd be happy to talk to you. Another thing that's going to change this week is that one of your expectations is to complete a map quiz exercise, since we're going to actually be delving into the different specific regions of the world. There's instructions on Carmen on how to go about doing this, and there'll be a Dropbox where you'll be able to submit screen captures from the quizzes that you've taken. That's what we'll use for our assessment to know that you've done the work. The key with this, obviously, you're doing this class online, it's open book, open note, open world. So the thing that we want to emphasize with you doing these quizzes is the idea of taking some time to do some repetition and learning where these places are, having them a little bit in your memory. So we'll use these map games as a way of trying to get you to think about these things and training your mind a little bit about it, but it's only worth a very small percentage of your grade. So don't take too much time stressing about it. Just use it as a tool to give you a sense of where these places are located. So what I want to do today, we're going to have sort of 2 different lecture videos. If you've read the chapter on the US and Canada, you see that your textbook goes into tremendous detail about this region. And this is a region that a lot of us are familiar with because many of us are taking the class from the US. And so we have some familiarity with at least this part of the world. So when we read the chapter, we'll realize there's much more information than we can ever memorize or deal with. And what I want you to keep in mind is to look at the sort of main summary points that your textbook lays out for you. I'm not overly interested in you learning all the intricate facts and details of different places. I want you to understand big picture processes and how they apply in specific locations. So don't fret the small stuff, but do look over the chapter and kind of give it an overview to give you a sense of place and some of the things that are going on in there. You'll notice, as you're familiar with North America, that the chapter and what I'm going to lecture about today does it absolutely no justice whatsoever, right? We're talking about each of these huge regions of the world in just a week's amount of time. So there's no way that we can get to everything. And so keep that in mind as we talk about other places of the world that you're not as familiar with, that we're just going to touch on areas a little bit, look at some generalizations, look at some examples, but we're not going to be able to obviously give a complete picture of the different parts of the world that we're discussing. So what I want to talk about a little bit today is I want to look at the economy in the United States, and also I want to look at health as it relates to geography. So we're going to break the lecture up into 2 sections, starting with the economy. So what I want to talk about first is back in sort of our introductory modules, we discussed the idea of hegemony. This is a country that tends to have sort of dominance over the world economy at a particular span of time. So this can be political dominance, economic dominance, military dominance. And the United States has been the world hegemon for, arguably the last 50 years, in most of our lifetimes. One thing we want to keep in mind with this is that this is very fluent sort of process. It's dynamic. We talked about Britain being the former hegemon, and the U.S. will likely, not continue to be the hegemon as we go forward. So this is something that's likely to change. So to just put some of this into perspective, this chart shows some development indicators for North America. We see here for the United States and Canada, GNI per capita for Canada, about 32,000. For the United States, about 41,000. Life expectancy, about 80 years in Canada, about 78 in the United States. And if we take a second, we can wonder why that might be the case. And one of the reasons you could put forward is that Canada has nationalized health insurance, so more people have access to health care, and perhaps that increases their life expectancy overall. Fairly low mortality rates, again, lower in Canada than in the United States, and ranking fairly highly in terms of gender equity. Now, the United States is the world's most powerful economy and controls about a quarter of the world's total GDP. Now, here's a map that kind of gives you a sense of the sizes of some of the major economies in the world as of 2005. So you see the United States here with the sort of largest bubble of $12.3 trillion is the size of the economy. And the other places that you see pictured here, you see Western Europe in the blue with about 11.8 trillion. You see China as another major economy with about 9.4 trillion. Russia, Japan, and India that pictured it there as well. India about 3.6 trillion there. So that's about where the economy splits up as of a couple years ago. What the expectation is that by 2050, China will become the largest economy in the world with about $44.5 trillion. The United States will be second with $35.2 trillion. Europe will maintain at about $18 trillion. India will increase to about $27 trillion. And Russia and Japan will sort of continue their growth as well. So you can see, again, an example of what the expectations are for shifts in global economic power. So we talk about the U.S. as having this huge economy, and one of the things that we pointed out as a critique of development indicators is to try to think about these indicators and break them down a little bit. If we break down the size of the U.S. economy and look at what that means for the everyday person, we might get kind of a different picture. This slide shows the progression of productivity and average real earnings in the U.S. from about 1945 to around 2005. And what you see in around 1975 is a split between productivity and the wages of goods producing workers. So you see corporations' productivity continued to increase and profitability continued to increase, but the wages of workers kind of stagnated in about 1975. And this kind of correlates with globalization and the ability for corporations to kind of move jobs out of the United States, to move jobs to new locations in the United States where they didn't have to deal with organized labor and that pressure to continue high wages and benefits. So with this, we see a change in terms of the U.S. population overall and how well they're doing. About 8.8 million U.S. families are below the poverty level, and the UN states that the U.S. has the highest child poverty rate of industrialized countries, as high as 17%. The U.S. also has very low government benefits and stagnation of wages for lower level income earners. One of the things that I wanted to have you all look at is this income visualizer that was originally published by Slate a couple years ago to try to get a sense of how income is distributed within the United States. I'm going to look at a couple slides here with you, and I'm also going to put a link to this up on the Carmen content page as well. So what this first chart shows is the increasing income share of the top 1% of Americans. So in 2008, 1% of the people, so 1 out of 100, had about 18% of the total wealth, where the other 99% of folks shared about 82% of the wealth. If we look at this chart, we see an even sort of more we see even more of an increase for the top 0.1%. So that top 1 person out of 1,000 has about 8% share of the total wealth, and the other 999 folks sharing about 92%. Now, if we look at this inequality across a map, we can see a couple different trends. For rural folks, we have increasing poverty. The other trend that we see is poverty in urban areas. And if we look at this map a little more closely, we see the areas in the darkest blue are places where 25% of the population or more live in poverty. And just kind of looking at it for spatial trends, we notice that the southern United States has quite high percentages of poverty. Appalachia, in southeastern Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, western Pennsylvania, it's another place of sort of concentrated poverty as well. So now we have a sense of wealth in America and some of the distribution there. We can think a little bit about how that's related to bigger ideas like the development of capitalism and the geography of capitalism overall. We can also think about capitalism as a dynamic process. So it's always changing, and it's influenced by social factors as well as economic factors, and it often runs up into various kinds of internal crises that need to be overcome in some way for the system to continue. So these crises often occur in specific places and are overcome in different ways, and this creates an uneven patchwork of development between cities, states, countries, regions across the entire globe. So these different solutions then also have very specific geographies and contribute to uneven development. So if we look at American capitalism as a sort of case study, we can kind of periodize it into a period that a lot of folks called Fordism, and a period that we now called post-Fordism. Not very creative, but Fordism you can think of as occurring from about 1945 to 1970, and the means of sort of organization of production was manufacturing sort of mass products for a mass consumption audience. We can think of the new economy as a sort of post-Fordist economy. In this sense, technology has really changed the manufacturing process. So people are able to use high-tech tools like computers and the internet to coordinate production across large spaces. There's new retailing models. So rather than everybody having to buy exactly the same thing, there's a lot of things that are highly customizable to fit consumer demand. There's a bigger focus on leisure goods and an infusion of more sort of entertainment value into products as well. So this is kind of reorganized work overall. So production, rather than being all stuck in one place and very hierarchical, has become flexible. And they also have reduced boundaries that we talked about a little bit when we spoke about globalization, to moving jobs to other parts of the world. Productivity is faster, but it's also riskier for both corporations and for employees because their jobs can be easily lost or become obsolete. And many of the jobs are more knowledge-based. So with this shift, you have not only an outright loss of jobs and those jobs shifting to places overseas, you have internal migration within the United States. So production moving from the Rust Belt areas that have strong union organizing and labor power to areas in what they've termed the Sun Belt or the Southern United States. But also we have not just the moving of particular industries from one place to another, but the blossoming of new types of industries. We also see a shift from manufacturing jobs, so those secondary sector jobs, to service economy jobs, tertiary jobs. The service sector jobs, a lot of them tended to be fairly low in pay and benefits. So we can think about how capitalism then leaves this uneven development even on the scale of the United States as a country.